Microphone on for those who are going to be listening online. So there's been a lot of suggestions on where this river is. The most common one tends to be where it is right now, because that's also where it is the closest, where the closest two rivers do intersect. Some people have proposed all the way up north. In fact, some people have proposed it not even anywhere near this area at all. In fact, there's a few scriptural references to the waters of the waters of Eden, supplying or at least one scriptural reference. I think it's Ezekiel 31. There's two that talk about the waters of Eden, and one of them says the waters of Eden supply the trees of Lebanon. Well, where's Lebanon? That's above Israel. Well, how far away is Israel from here? Yeah, it's hundreds of miles away. Probably, maybe even 1,000 miles away. I don't know the actual distance, but I know it's quite a bit. It's not something that you would see a river do over the span of a few thousand years. Maybe over millions of, maybe over hundreds of thousand years, but definitely not over a few thousand years. So just because the Bible is necessarily referencing the Tigris and the Euphrates, one does not mean it's talking specifically about this Tigris and the Euphrates. And at the very least, we know it's not talking about this Tigris and the Euphrates in this modern day state. Some people have guessed at other things. I think some of them are really far out there. I think it's like the Mormons or something. One really strange religious group believes that Eden is in Jackson County, Missouri. I think that's in Yes, I think that is in Ozark country. You guys ever been to Ozark country? Ozark country is beautiful. I love Ozark country, but I'm pretty sure it's not Eden at all, especially because it's not really built in a valley. It's more like these cliffs or this mountainous area. Very pretty, but not at all. Now, what does make this really, really interesting is that we have two rivers, so we have 2 points of reference. You need a third point of reference for an exact location, but even that, if that were the case, we see, looking at the map, there are no other rivers that could possibly be. Now, this might be referring to minor rivers or minor water, like streams, something that might not show up on a map. Like when you look at a map of the United States, you definitely see the Missouri River, and you know about some of the other rivers as maybe a local, but you wouldn't see them on a normal map. So it might be something like this, or it could be that these rivers no longer exist. What makes this really, really interesting is that there was a space shuttle mission. I mean, we're always doing space shuttle missions. We got, ever since Challenger? Was it Challenger? Was that the one that exploded? Yeah. Ever since Challenger exploded, it got a little bit more hectic, and so then they kind of were a lot more careful about their space shuttle missions, and a lot more, not hectic, a lot more cautious. That's the word I'm looking for. It got a lot more cautious, but they were still sending space missions up in the air. And in 1994, during the Endeavour mission, they launched a satellite as part of that mission in the world to do topographical surveys of, into space, to do topographical surveys of the world. Well, what's a topographical survey? Does anybody know? Yes. Yeah, top down. It's like you ever look at one of those water tables? Actually, they're really cool now. If you go to like a children's museum, they have these huge topographical maps that you can play with and project down on them, and they'll measure the sand going up and down. And they'll change the color of it based on how you play with it. Yeah, so they're really cool now. But so basically, if you go and you look at these topographical maps, they'll be exactly what you look for. You kind of have to know what you're looking for. I tried to find the one that he was referencing, but there are hundreds of maps, probably even thousands of maps, because it was done to take many pictures along the Earth. And so this man, he was a scientist. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name, but you can see it's this F.L. Baz. Farouk. Okay, I'll try. Farouk. Any guess? Um, yeah, good enough for me. He was studying these satellite images, and he found out that there was a riverbed that he estimated to be dried up sometime between this 1500-year period. And it crosses northern Arabia. It is now in the area of it's called a wadi, something wadi. Maybe it's the Kuwait wadi. No, I don't think that doesn't sound right, but something like that. And so he tied the river to that wadi based on the topographical maps. And since then, people have said, well, this is probably one of the other two, making sense that it is in the northern Arabia, that this might be the Pishon River that references specifically being in the land of Arabia, which is a great discovery if it is what we think it is, because it means that the oral tradition relatively held up. As we didn't have a written translation of the events till probably around the time of Moses, or at the earliest. So you were looking at people passing down one story to the next, and if Moses lived sometime around, let's say 1500 BC, then these people were remembering events 500 years at least, or even farther back than what they would have actually happened, especially if they were in Egypt enslaved for 450 of those years. Let's go back 1,000 years. We'll be generous. And that's really, really important for us, because it says that even though that we didn't for the longest time have physical proof, now we do have physical proof that these rivers exist, that at least the memory of these rivers held up enough that they were recorded as part of the Eden story. From what we know, here's another one of those maps, that this is what we know about the river itself. So we don't really know where it is today, not the river itself, the Garden of Eden itself. We don't really know where it is today, and I think it's going to be one of these things where we're never going to know. I mean, even if we find existence of a fourth river and that we could pinpoint these four rivers in a very specific spot, this land has been so covered in an archaeological survey and exploration and space pictures or pictures from satellites that we're not ever going to find proof of a garden. And for our purposes as Christians, that's fine. We don't, yeah. Mm-hmm. We don't need proof of the garden. But it is kind of neat to see things like this. As far as the garden itself, this is what we know about the garden. We know that the garden contained two specific trees, and that is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life, meaning that one who ate the tree would presumably live forever. And we don't know if this means that you only had to eat from it once or continuously. I personally think it was kind of a continuous thing, because we know Adam and Eve lived for a long time. Presumably, there was only one commandment, not to eat from one specific tree, and that was not the tree of life. So I think it's fair to say that they probably did eat from the tree of life. And then once they left the garden, that they no longer had access to that. And the farther out you get away from there, that people start to live not as long. Yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. You explained it a little bit better than I did. And then, of course, the knowledge of good and evil, which they were not commanded to eat, but eventually did eat. They learned the difference between good and evil, and thus introducing sin in the world. Not necessarily that sin is not introduced because they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It is introduced in the world because they disobeyed God, and this is the specific way they disobeyed God. So I don't necessarily know if there's any special connection here. Now I'm talking a little bit biblically, not so much archaeologically, is that human tendency is always to move towards sin. God said, don't do this. I think in the beginning, God kept it very, very simple to him because, or at least simple for man and woman is, you have things open to you, and you don't have the law. There's no law yet. You have perfection, or what is perceived by perfection, and God gives them one rule. I feel like if he'd given them many rules, they would have broken one of those other ones before they broke this one. But they made it a very simple one. Don't break this, and you can have anything with the implication that you can have anything else that you want. So it really kind of shows that man is never satisfied with what they're given. Mm-hmm. Yeah. This story is not unique to the biblical narrative. Well, the Eden story is a little bit unique, but the things in the Eden story aren't necessarily unique. We see elements where humanity rebels against God and other and mythologies. We see other stories where people try to find the ways to live forever. I think Fountain of Youth, that was the one I always grew up hearing about. I think that's a Spanish story with Cortez and something. And there's also times where man did walk with God or live with God or at least could access opportunity with God, but once a transgression is introduced into the story, it does cut out. There are a few of them, but I just want to focus on this particular one. How many of you have heard the Epic of Gilgamesh? It is a rather large story. In fact, it could probably be its own version of Genesis. I don't know if it's longer than the book of Genesis, but it is a rather interesting thing. It reads a little bit to me. When I was in high school, I had to read Beowulf. Yeah. So when I read the Epic of Gilgamesh, it reminds me of reading Beowulf, and I did not like reading Beowulf, so I did not really like reading this. Yes. Sorry. No, I'm not sorry. I don't have to apologize for that. If you want to spend some time reading it, I encourage you to read it. You might find it interesting. Especially, you'll see a lot of parallels to other biblical stories right here. This particular one I want to focus on right now has to do with Gilgamesh and the Tree of Life. I printed off what is a kids version of it. It was written to explain the story to children, so it kind of reads like a children's story. But basically, the gist of this story is that a long time ago, there was this great king called Gilgamesh, and this is common to the rest of the story. He himself was considered to be a minor god or a demigod or maybe just a super powerful human who could do feats that no other mortal men could do. Kind of think of Hercules. I mean, Hercules technically was a god, but then he lost all his god. Well, that's the Disney version. The actual I don't know if he was a god. I think he had a human mother. But that's beside the point. I'm getting sidetracked. So he hears this story one day about this tree that can grant him everlasting life. So he gets on this boat and he takes his boat and he starts sailing to this area, which takes him about 40 days and 40 nights. Well, now we're drifting into another story, but it is what it is. And then after he gets there, he meets this king and queen of the nation of the area, and I don't know if they're supposed to be gods too, or just maybe like. They remind me of Tom Bombadil from The Hobbit, or not The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings. Just like really great, jolly people that aren't really, that have everything they want in their life. They're content. So he stays with them for 7 days and 7 nights, and they give him some direction on where he can find the tree for eternal life. And then he has to sail in his boat to the deepest part of the ocean, defeat an octopus, and then he has to cut a branch off from the tree of life, and then he eats it. And the story says he won't live forever, but he'll live for a very long time. And then while he's there, after he does this, he decides before he eats it, he's going to sleep. And during the night, a snake comes up and steals the plants and eats it himself. And then, as in the children's version of the story says, That was not what he was supposed to do. In anger, the gods punished the snake by making it crawl on the belly forever. So are you seeing our parallels here with the Garden of Eden story? Now, does this mean that the biblical narrative steals from this story, or this story steals from the biblical narrative? No, it's probably not. It's really hard to say which story is an older story, because like I said, the biblical narrative is not a written account compared to some of these other nations. Sumeria, Babylon, and Assyria have much older written accounts of before the Hebrew language develops into a written language. So it doesn't necessarily mean that their story is older. It just means that we can find older versions of it. At the very least, we see parallels of the story, meaning that if the Bible story is the one true narrative, and I think it is, that other stories took elements, the stories, or it got distorted over time, much like a game of telephone. I love the telephone game because it's especially the more people you have. You guys ever play a giant game of telephone? Like if you do a few people, you could probably contain the message. But if you do more than like 20, you're not going to have anything close to the same thing. So the fact that there are some elements in the story that are similar certainly makes sense, especially in a very grand and epic tale like Gilgamesh. So I encourage you can read this version. Like I said, it's a kid's version, or you can go and read your own version. That's completely up to you. Nobody should stop you. In fact, I think it's good that everyone go and learn about these cultures altogether. That's basically all I have on the garden. Do you have any questions about the garden before moving on to the flood? Oh. Well, we have points of where the center is. The 4 points are where the center is, not where the 4 walls are, I would say. So there's no way to say that. I will say this, when we're talking about this verse in Lebanon, that the waters of Eden water the trees of Lebanon, if that's true, then we are looking at, and this is true, then you are looking at it as a huge location, easily larger than, it might be one of the largest countries in the world. Yeah, possibly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We don't really see a lot of that, and what we do see, a lot of very specific references to measurements. In fact, I can only think of 2 places in the Bible where we get, land-specific measurements. Now, we get very specific measurements in the Bible, especially when it comes to the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, and the ark. We have very specific what those dimensions would look like. But when it comes to land measurements, we only get 2. And one of them is told through the interpretation of the dream, a dream, and another one is very, very abstract, and that is in Revelation. I actually calculated that one. This has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but when you talk about the city at the end of Revelation, where God will be with all of his people, that is roughly the size of Saudi Arabia. So that is huge, because I mean, Saudi Arabia is a pretty decent sized country. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it have to be a very fertile area. And while this area is, or it can be very, very fertile, especially in the north, right here, like I was pretty close to the Euphrates, and it's almost all desert now in modern day Iraq. So I can't possibly tell you how big it was. I can only tell you specifically, according to those 4 points, here's the center. X marks the spot. All right, so let's move on. Genesis chapter 5 through 11, we see one of our longer narratives happening right here now, which is going to be right before the Abraham narrative, and that is going to be the flood and essentially the end of a long life. Now, what I find very interesting about this is up to this point, especially starting in about Genesis chapter 4 and 5, you're going to see these really long, boring genealogies that nobody ever pays any attention to. In fact, I'm willing to bet that when people read these genealogies, they just read them to get through them, saying, all right, I did it. But there is some really, really interesting stuff in there. You can read about the guy who essentially discovered metal. You can read about the Enoch, who it said he did not die, but God took him. And then we can also see some hints pointing towards Jesus along the way, especially when we're following back the timeline. Methuselah, the oldest guy in the Old Testament, or in the world. But this idea of people living for long periods of time is fascinating to me, because while I'm not exactly sure how that they measured time, because people don't always measure time in the exact same way, a lot of these Middle Eastern countries went by a lunar calendar. While we know the lunar calendar is actually more accurate than the solar calendar that we have today, not everybody used it in the same way, and even those that did use it in the same way had to compensate often, and not everybody always compensated. So it creates a very big mess. This can become even more problematic as you get into kings, especially when the kingdom splits, because the northern kingdom is using one calendar, and the kingdom of Judea is using a second calendar, and there's about a 6 months difference between those two calendars. So people who go and try to reconcile those two things, they're like, oh, well, the dates don't match up. And one of the reasons they don't match up is because they're not even using the same calendars. So that's problematic. But yes, we see that long life is certainly something that is preserved in these different cultures. You can read in the Sumerian, read in the Sumerian stories about kings that lived for hundreds of thousands of years. And also after the same thing, after their flood event, lifespans tend to get significantly lower as time goes on. Same with Babylonian cultures, same with Assyrian cultures, and I think it's even true with Egyptian cultures, but do not quote me on that one. Now, I don't have a whole lot to really say about the flood, other than it's probably, a lot of people, some people, skeptics will come up to you and are like, worldwide event flood never happened. There's plenty of people who say that. What I find interesting so much is, while I can't prove a worldwide flood, I can say that we have found we have found seashells on top of mountains, but because land is always shifting, it's really hard to say that those seashells were there because of a flood, and that doesn't necessarily mean that even if they were there because of the flood, that there would be a lot of them. There will be some of them. But what I do find interesting is this. Pass that back. Oh, sorry. Almost every culture in the world, almost every single one of them, all over the world, has a flood narrative. It's probably the one thing that everybody has in common. We don't even all eat corn, and most people eat corn. Not everybody eats corn. Almost every culture in the world has a flood narrative. It is probably the single most thing that unites us all. Well, that's me just being over the top about. This picture is it's cuneiform, which is the Sumerian writing, and it is a list of the ages of kings. Thank you. That's a good question. You can see it. Here's different versions of it. from the Americas to the Europe to the, some of these make more sense, especially East Asia and Oceania. Those places were constantly being flooded by rain, so yeah, that's not all that surprising. But to see it in places like the middle of Africa, or like in the Himalayas, also have versions of it. Those really, really high mountains, that you can find that there is a flood narrative everywhere. And this is a very short, this is not an exhaustive list. I got this list off of Wikipedia. And if you want to actually learn more about this, you could just go to Wikipedia and type in flood narrative, and you will see the extent, you will see these. You can learn about them. You could probably even compare them and see what their similarities are. One thing that I've always found is they're interesting is that, and I wish I put this up here, is there is a man who wrote, who did a study of Chinese letters, and he called it, characters in Genesis or something like that. I can't remember what it was. But he pointed to different words, and a lot of Chinese words are words that are smaller words broken down into a larger word. They take words and we do it too. Like we have suffixes and prefixes. We kind of squish those words together and we get a more compounded word. But they do it in their little, what do they call Chinese writing? I'm drawing a blank on what that is. Hutonghua. And their characters. And they take those simple characters and they make more convoluted ones. And the old word for boat, not their Mandarin word for boat, but their older word for boat is basically 3 separate words. And those 3 separate words is boat, mouth, 8. So they take those 3 characters and they made a compounded word, and that is their word for boat. And so literally it translates to, if you broke each one of those down separately, 8 mouths on a boat. And that particular word, it dates back to at least 4,000 years ago. Not a whole lot to say here, other than I think it's just really fascinating that you can see these all over the world. Any questions about this? Yes. Their word for mouth can be used to mean people. Normally, their word for mouth means opening. Like you'll see it a lot. Especially like when you're driving on the road, you might see an exit, and the word for exit is like out of mouth. But yes, it can mean a few different things. So the next thing that we see in Genesis, we kind of shift from the ancient in more to the, I want to say, a little bit more modern. Does anybody know what this is? Yeah, okay. What were you saying? Temple? Yes, it is a temple. I believe it is a temple to the moon god or sun god. I don't know. It is a very prominent structure in Babylon, especially in Ur, and it is called a ziggurat. It is a multi-layered building that stretches high up into the air. In fact, you can go and see this today. Well, these are more modern. Oh yeah, so you can go and see one today. This is what it looks like. It is still standing thousands of years later. That's how great that ingenuity was. Like some of those really old buildings are mathematically perfect, to especially be able to survive this long, especially like things like the pyramids. I'm amazed on how mathematically perfect the pyramids are. I don't know if it's the same thing for here, but this is basically what it is today. If you have ever had the courage to go to modern day Iraq, you can go and look at this, and it's probably a neat thing to see. I've never got to see it, so good luck to you. But this, many people believe, is the influence to the Tower of Babel story, or the pyramids, but I think this one makes a little bit more sense, especially because it's more prominent to the area, and the pyramids this actually predates the pyramids, and it is believed to be a place where gods lived. Now, does this prove that there was a Tower of Babel? Or does this prove that, or was this the Tower of Babel? Uh, I think that this is probably an example of the Tower of Babel, humans trying to be greater than God, but I don't necessarily think that this itself was the Tower of Babel. There's no proof for either one of them, other than that these massive structures developed in the area supposedly where the Tower of Babel story occurred. Yes. How many more I couldn't tell you. I just know that there is more than one. And there are certainly many more like it all over the world. If you say the pyramids are like it, that's one of them. We see temples in both, you said, what was the one you said? Yeah, Incas and Aztecs. They built similar temples. We are still kind of building similar temples. All these buildings were supposedly built with the ziggurat design in mind. I think that's this last one is an architectural travesty. It looks ugly and awful, and I would never want to work in that building. But the other two are quite well known. This middle one is a hotel in, I think, Baghdad. It looks like a really fancy hotel. And the first one is even more well known. Does anybody know what that is? It is the British Intelligence Building. Yes, you will often see, if you ever watch a James Bond movie, you will often see this building, that they are operating inside this particular building. So we have no way to tell. We do know that humans developed differently depending on their language systems, and that could have been because people migrate and found different ways to talk to each other, or it could be because, as the story tells us, God confused the languages because humans got too big for their britches. Well, that's probably a very crude way to say it, but moving on, we're going to learn about the Ur of the Chaldees. Do you guys remember what Ur is? Ur? Abraham, more specifically, yes. Ur came from the land of the Ur of the Chaldeans, as the Bible says. This is the land that Abraham was living in when God called him to his ministry, or at least called him to leave his home and go to the land that I will tell you, the land flowing with milk and honey. But before we get to that part, because we're not quite there yet, let's talk about where Abraham was at that particular time. He was in this city called Ur, and this is a real city. We have proof that this city actually existed. There's still archaeological studies being done on this city today. It is in modern-day Iraq or Mesopotamia. It is a city-state, meaning that it governs itself. It was not a part of any larger kingdom, at least at this time, and developed sometime probably around 380 BC at the beginning of the Bronze Age. So that means by the time that Abraham existed, this city was already very well established. It would have been a very thriving place. I like we're going to name this city. I love it when I see things like that because that's actually more common than you see. You know what God called man? You know what God called man? Man, he called man. So when he's talking to Adam, he's literally saying man. The word Adam means man in Hebrew. But it is important because it represents, for us it is important because it essentially represents the birthplace of Abraham or Abram, depending on your translation, or at least how you want to reference him, and also the birthplace of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, Christianity obviously coming much later. From there we can see some of the ways that they studied and built, specifically who they worshipped. We see that it was like many of the people at the time in the area, they had a very extensive pantheon. Do you guys know what a pantheon is? A pantheon is like a group of gods. So like we don't have a pantheon. We are monotheistic with a trinity. But we do not have a pantheon where they would have had many gods for many, many different things depending on the importance of that god. Think Ra. Ra is the sun god in Egypt. He is their most important god. Or think Zeus. Zeus is the god of lightning. Yeah, and so that would be for the Greeks. Or Odin. He was for north, the Vikings area. I think he was the god of magic, though I'm not really sure. I didn't really study that part of religion. And so they would build, of course, like all people, they would build temples and shrines and places of worship for these gods. In this case, like I said here, this one was built to the moon god Nana, which translates to sin, not having to do with the biblical definition of sin, but the actual name sin. The Greek word for sin is, I don't know what the Hebrew word for sin is. I'd have to look that one up. I know the Greek word for sin is hamartia, and that sounds nothing like our word for sin. And we're a lot closer to Greek than we are to Ur of the Chaldeans. We've seen many excavations on this area. One of them is done by a man, Sir Leonard Woolley, which I know probably doesn't really mean much to you, but if you studied archaeology, he's considered to be one of the most important people in archaeology. Not so much biblical archaeology, those that you will see you will see very important names, such as Albright and Kenyon, for excavation, especially when you get to Kenyon, who pioneered digging methods. But basically, modern day archaeology basically developed because of the work he did. Of course, it was refined over the years, but before that, they were just kind of like digging up willy-nilly and doing whatever they wanted. In fact, the Chinese, they would use water blasting. You guys know what water blasting is? Like, let's turn a fire hose on this area. We're going to dig things up that way, which is a terrible way to do things because you risk destroying what you're looking for, and you're also you miss destroying what you're digging up. You also might miss things altogether. So he basically developed a lot of the modern day pioneering methods. He found many things, such as treasures, burials, a ton of wealth, which has probably all been pillaged or stolen or by the British, because they did a lot of that. And he found that this was not a agrarian society, a farming society of what we expect most places to be, especially places before irrigation. But he found this to be a very thriving area, and remained so pretty much for a very long time. You could go back, you can go and you can look at a ton of different stuff on this. You can see it was very well political connected, and eventually lasted for about 2,000 years. The decline around the 6th century BC. This says, what I said it probably declined due to climate change and shifting rivers, which is true. That's how a lot of ancient cities developed. As you lost their strength, as you lose your access to water, it makes it very hard for people to live near you. But there's also something very significant that happens in the 6th century. I'm wondering if any of you know that. In this area. And who destroyed it? You're almost there. Who destroyed it? Yeah, that's the Babylonians. Yes, so the Babylonians rose to power in this time. They were probably already decreasing because of these things, and they either got absorbed by the Assyrians, the Babylonians either absorbed them or they conquered them. They both seem likely. I don't really know, but it was probably because they were so close to each other anyway that it was it was probably more of the absorption. And so, in the middle of all of this, so we got this thriving city where Abraham is probably well set. We know that he's wealthy. The Bible makes it clear that he's very wealthy by biblical standards at this time period. Probably did very, very well. He's 70 years old. For most of us, that means you're moving into retirement. But Abraham is still got a lot of bit of ways to go. God says, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be praised." So this is what God does to him and what is considered to be the height of society at this time. I don't have any parallels to this story. I don't see anywhere else where a man is called either from a dream or at an old age to leave behind prosperity and go to follow the will of God. Not like this anyway. There's a few things that might vaguely fits that description, but nothing like what we're going to see with Gilgamesh in the Garden of Eden. Nothing like what we're going to see with the different flood narratives. That doesn't necessarily mean they're not out there. I just don't know about them. But I don't really so much as want to focus on that. The question that I want to focus on is, with Abraham being such an important figure in the Old Testament, probably, arguably, in the top three, I would say probably at least the top two, do we have proof that he existed? Yes. No. There is no recorded history that Abraham existed. Outside the Bible. Outside the Bible. I want to clarify that point. In the Bible, there is proof that he existed. Outside the Bible, there is no proof that he existed. The main reason for this is for when the story starts, this is Abraham's life. He is a nomad. We have very, very little on nomadic lifestyle, even by today's standards, of watching nomads. So one of the most famous nomadic tribes that are still in existence today are the Bedouins. They are in the Mesopotamian area. A lot of people in those areas will hire them to do odd jobs and stuff, but they themselves have no home. They kind of shift with their animals, and they're always moving around. Or gypsies. Gypsies might be another modern day version of that. And so tracking their movements or finding documentation outside of oral storytelling becomes difficult because that's not how those people lived. When you're constantly moving around, you want to take very little with you. And as someone who's moved around a lot, the number one thing I do when I get ready to leave is I purge. You can always tell when I'm getting ready to move because my trash can will be full for months. So Abraham and his descendants lived as semi-nomads. He did kind of stay in the same general area. And so because of that, people leave behind very little material that is hard to trace through archaeological means. However, that doesn't mean that someone like Abraham did not exist. There is plenty of evidence that that the story that is told in the Abraham narrative is a true story because it illustrates common practices at that time. There's no inscriptions of the surrounding empires. We know that Abraham made some deals with some smaller kings and nations, but that doesn't necessarily mean they wrote anything down, and even those were very, very small. If we have anything, it would have to be from the larger ones, like Egypt, Assyria, Sumeria, and we don't have anything like that. And, of course, many people believe that the Pentateuch was written much, much later. So what we have are the indirect parables. And the first one of this is the names, obviously. So if you were, what's a very common Southern name? Oh, two names. Those are very common. So normally when I meet someone with, normally when I meet someone with two first names, I immediately think that they are from the South, because that's not something you really see in the North. Or if you meet a Hermione, that's become very, very popular because of the Harry Potter books. But Hermione is also very much a British name. So your immediate reaction is either A, they love Harry Potter, or B, depending on their dialect, the dialect would probably be a big giveaway that they are from Great Britain. Or Adolf, if you're German. Adolf is a very common German name. Even though we don't like that name, we tend to avoid it. Jesus, very common Spanish name. You get the picture. So we can say, based on the names, that these were very much names for the time period. Abraham is a little bit more, we see derivatives of Abram or Abraham. This one I gave right here, Ramu. Was a very, very common name that we found written on different tablets. Laban is a very common Semitic name, and El, as in Israel, often to the god El, the cultural Canaanite god, but also another name for Yahweh that is sometimes used is a very common name for that area. Marriage is sister wife. I mean, we don't really do this. We're not Mormons, or those people. That's Utah. They're Mormons. They practice polygamy. But for the longest time, especially in this area, that sister wife was very, very common. You wanted the best. You wanted many, many hands to provide and work for, especially if you had many animals, like someone like Abraham. So you want to make sure you have kids to help take care of that. So we have found that this was not only a common practice, but is a very well-documented common practice. We might frown on it today. In fact, I think in most places in the United States, it is outlawed. One wife, and that's probably a good idea, because I couldn't imagine having two at all. Surrogacy, we do have surrogacy today, especially with modern medicine. It's expensive, very, very expensive from what I understand, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to take, but surrogacy was still used for a very long time period, and it was very, very common. Not only would, if your wife was not providing you with a child, the problem must be with her, and so it was the wife's responsibility that if she could not give you a child, she had to find someone who could give you a child. That very much lines up with the Abraham narrative, because it is not Abraham who goes and finds himself another woman, but it is Sarah who brings him the woman to reproduce with. Covenant making, that's been around for a very long time. Today we still practice forms of covenant making. Maybe it might, when I was a kid, we used to do this gross thing where you spit on your hand and you shake, and it's really, really gross. But covenant making has been around for forever. It's not even unique to this area. Normally how covenant making works is you have a great power and a lesser power. And it is the lesser power to serve the greater one, and it is the greater one's job to protect the lesser one. That is very much what we see through the covenant making of Abraham and God, how it is God who will protect and extend Abraham's line, and it is Abraham and his children that will follow him. Along with covenant making, we see cutting as a form of covenant making, or blood oathing. This is probably where the idea of circumcision came from, and I'm glad that's something we don't really practice anymore, though I know some doctors still do it. They say that there's medical reasons. I mean, go back and forth on it, but I'm just glad we don't live in that time period. Because it is not a very common thing. Nomadic and semi-nomadic lifestyles were very much practiced. Purchasing land grants. So when Abraham's wife dies, it says he buys a cave, and he has to pay for silver. That is very much common with the practice. You don't normally buy land with gold. You normally buy land with silver. I don't know why that is, but you see that carried over into the New Testament, where Judas is given 30 pieces of silver to betray Jesus. And then after Judas tries to return the money, what do they do with the money? They buy land with it. So it's very much, it's another common practice. Religious. Mm-hmm. Well, it's not specifically not permitted, but I'm just saying it's common in the area. You could tell that God was not happy with it, but it's nowhere in the Bible up to this point where we see, oh, you shouldn't do that.
Well, I thought in the New Testament it was like from the beginning, God never intended.
Sure.
Where I got that from.
Never intended. Are you talking about divorce?
The multiple wives. Well, I guess that in the thing that was.
Yeah.
But yeah, having more than one wife.
So you see that the problem is that God says you're going to have a child,
Right.
and you're going to have the child through Sarah. The problem is, well, the timeline's not working, so they default to the culture. Yes.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah. Now, I would imagine that's the issue, is you're not trusting in God, not that you're doing something else. Because we see that there are other examples in the Bible of people having multiple wives that aren't necessarily called out for it.
So it started with, which one was
Talking about Solomon?
started before that. First Adam and Eve.
How did they have multiple?
Their son went off, remember? He was the first person recorded in the Bible who had more than one wife.
I don't remember that. You'll have to look that up now. That's an interesting fact. No, I don't remember that. Where is that? That must be in Genesis 4.
Right, early Genesis.
Yeah, it'd have to be in Genesis 4. That's the only thing that makes sense. You're talking about Cain? Yeah. Now I know he married. A woman. Yeah, but I don't remember him having a second wife. Huh. All right. I'll look. I believe you. You were on that. Was that one of the Bible questions you had at St. Andrews? We'll talk a little bit more about this next time, but I think I'm just kind of illustrating the same point, is that I can't prove to you that these people existed. But I also want to say that I would not look too much into this. One of the most well-documented books, not historically, but through preservation, is the Bible. We have thousands and thousands, I think it's more than 25,000 fragments, books, codexes, where we can check over hundreds of years, that we could check these things to make sure that they fit in what they've said. We've found constantly that they fit in the time period and in the culture and in what you would expect from those people. And then there will still be people who dismiss it. And I will say that those same people who will dismiss it are also the kind of same people who will take other things as his historical fact. For example, I think it's like Alexander the Great, one of the greatest kings of the known world at that time, conquered land from Greece to India, and died very, very unexpectedly. I think there's only one biography of him, and that biography of him came out hundreds of years after his death. And that biography is accepted as historical fact, when there's more evidence and more direct parallels to the Bible. So people are who people are going to be. Any questions on today's lesson? All right. I do not think, I know we haven't met very often, but I think next time I will be taking the kids to camp. So we will not be meeting next time. But after that, I have no plans to miss any future meetings. Yeah.